Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Puzzled Minds podcast. Our guest today is Dave, so please give him a warm welcome.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to be here this morning.
We really appreciate you coming on and taking out the time to do this. So today our topic is brought to you by the letter H for human adaptation. Today we'll be talking about how adaptive evolution has allowed certain human beings over time to be better suited for their environment. And then a little later talking about how a gene therapy technique called CRISPR and how it can change the world, maybe for better or for worse. And so speaking of human adaptation, have you guys heard of these people called the Baju or Beju people?
Yeah, that's a big diving culture, right?
Yeah. So they are a group of people that live in the like the Southeast Asia, so kind of like the Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines area. And so what they do, they're, I guess, known for swimming underwater for as long as 13 minutes. And they do it without any scuba gear, and they dive as deep as like 200 feet. And they catch fish or whatever, sea animals that they need to for jobs or for eating, for whatever it is. And so for reference, an Olympic-sized pool is 6 feet. And the deepest pool in the world is called the Nemo 33, which is the deepest indoor pool. So that one is 113 feet. And for all those people that are metric people, it's 34.5 meters. So going back to the Olympic-sized pool, these Baju people are allowed to swim. It looks like it's about 33 Olympic-sized pools deep, if that makes sense. So it's pretty deep. And they spend about 60% of their workday underwater.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. The fact that they can tap to that.
Yeah, and also to put that 200 feet into perspective, they say like the average healthy, moderately athletic person could dive probably about 60 feet before they would really be under a lot of pressure. So these people can do more than 3 times that. Wow. Just in the day-to-day.
Yeah, they so it's said that it might be due to the fact that they have like larger spleens. And so I guess they compared the spleens to like local like nearby farmers and I guess the Han Chinese around the area. And the Baju people have about 50% larger than normal spleen. And I think the long story short is that they're able, because they have larger spleens, they're able to push out more oxygenated red blood cells into their body, thus giving them kind of like an extra breath.
That's pretty. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying that. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So I guess the larger spleen just serves as like an oxygen reservoir while they're underwater like that.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like their own, like you said, kind of like air reservoir, but kind of like their air tank, but inside of their body, I guess, like a natural air tank.
So do their bodies over time evolve to do this, or is it just based off their environment that their bodies are just like, okay, you guys are going to need these larger spleens to do this said thing?
I want to say it's kind of like over time, I guess because they spend more than 50% of their time underwater, their body had to adapt. And to better serve them, their body adapted to having or being able to carry more oxygen. And so I guess that's kind of like an overtime thing. Probably the first person of their tribe, when they first probably went deep dive fishing, probably could hold their breath for maybe like 2 minutes. Maybe. I don't know.
That's pretty cool. Have you guys ever thought about like whenever like your body goes through like an evolution, is it always a group of people that first like are born with these bigger spleens, or is it like one person and then all of a sudden it's passed down?
Mm-hmm.
Because clearly their bodies are like, okay, you guys are doing this one thing all the time. You need this bigger spleen to, I guess say collect more oxygen so they don't die going through these, I guess, lower and lower levels of I guess lakes, rivers, or whatever they're diving into. But I wonder if I wonder when that evolution starts. That's the part that's always very curious to me. Where what is it? Like 10 years into them consistently doing this, you have like a child that's born with a bigger spleen, or is it something that gradually happens over time with the people that are actually alive while doing this?
I feel like it's a gradual thing over time, kind of like what I
Hmm.
said before. Like I think
Yeah.
it's not like how we have one kid now we go from like 2 minutes to 13 minutes just like that. But um, I'd probably say, well, maybe like this is the number I'm pulling out of my ass, but maybe like 5 or 6, maybe generations, maybe even more.
True.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't really
It's
have
it's
like a.
definitely yeah, it's definitely small little changes over time. So just from generation to generation to generation, just a little bit more gets built on each time. So I mean, you can see it a lot with different birds, how they've evolved different shapes of beaks to suit whatever they need. Like they'll have more of a blunt beak if they're going to be trying to bash open a nut, or they'll
Mhm.
have a long pointed beak if they need to reach into a tree to get to some sort of food source. You know what I mean? And that shape will change gradually over time. It's not all of a sudden you have a flat beak and then the next generation of birds have a really long, thin, pointy beak. It would gradually happen.
Wasn't that something that like Darwin studied?
Hmm.
He studied like
Yeah,
birds.
yeah, that was something like in a lot of his journals from the Galapagos Islands.
What about like woodpeckers? I guess those are the ones that have like the big beaks that allow them, or not big beaks, but like longer beaks allow them to get into like inside the tree.
Hmm. Yeah,
Do you guys think that you guys can see this with like higher altitude people?
yeah. I was actually looking into that a little bit too. There's a couple different high altitude cultures throughout the world. So there's really three areas that I found. The first was in Tibet. The second would be in the Andes Mountains, so that would be places like Peru and Chile, and then also in Ethiopia. Um, Now, the thing that I thought was really interesting about this was the mechanism. It seems like for this adaptation is really the same. So all of these places, all of these different cultures have different genes that allow them to have more higher content of hemoglobin in their blood, which means that when you have more hemoglobin, you can hold on to more oxygen and you can breathe more easily in an oxygen poor environment, which is what a high altitude environment is. So, in the cases of Peru and in Tibet, the cultures are very defined by this one specific gene. Like each culture is like everyone has this gene. And that really makes you think, oh, this would be more of a natural selection process where people who just didn't have that gene unfortunately would die because they weren't able to survive or they had to move to a lower altitude climate and leave that culture. So at that point, you're only really continuing to reproduce with that gene present. So everyone's getting that gene passed down. In Ethiopia, there's actually 4 different gene types that are responsible for having a higher concentration of hemoglobin, which makes me think that over time, that's been more of an adaptation thing, so that there may have been one specific gene that everyone had at one point, but over time, since historically the Ethiopians have been there for a very long time, they have sort of adapted and built on the one gene that they had, and now the body over time is trying to improve it and make it even more efficient.
So that's incredible to me. Like it's one of those things where the body literally was more like you said, natural selection. So pretty much you have an entire generation of a mixed people, I guess, mixed group of people where some people are built to survive in this environment, some people aren't. But the people that aren't are just dying off. So the next generation is going to be built with people that are meant to thrive in, whatever environment. And as brutal as it sounds, it's entirely necessary.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, so those are really the first two kind of like pathways for for people to kind of adapt to whatever's going on. So you've got like just natural adaptation over time. We already touched on natural selection, where people, don't live long enough to reproduce, and then those genes will die off. And then the third one's really selective breeding. We don't really see this in humans too much anymore, but a good example of this is kind of the Scandinavian cultures. A lot of them are very large, blonde, tall people, and this kind of happened because when the Vikings in medieval times, when they would sail around that area, they would more or less kind of hijack people and take the most desirable women and breed with them in order to kind of make bigger, stronger people. I don't know if that was on purpose or on accident, but either way it happened. So just kind of another pathway to look at.
Do you think that like if the Vikings, like having the Viking people reproduce with just the strongest amount, you think that they would, if they didn't, I guess, lose their power? I mean, I don't really know that much about Vikings, so I'm just kind of.
It's not really like a loss of power thing. It's just that if they were going to pillage a village and if they were going to go do that, they would see, a tall blonde woman, they would kidnap her as opposed to leaving her, or I guess killing her or whatever. And they would take them.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was done.
Well, also as well too, I was reading the thing that like we're actually programmed to know like physical traits in the opposite sex that are desirable. Like we're pre-programmed. Like for example, the reason why dumb as it sounds, like men tend to like women with like, let's say for example, like bigger asses or bigger hips, because it's for reproduction purposes. We like subconsciously look at a woman with like big hips, like okay, she has like a massive birth canal. If as much as like we know, we look at like, oh, it's attractive for a woman to have X amount of things, but it's also the same thing with like breasts and stuff like that. Like she'd be able to feed a child. So you can think about it back in the day of something like the Vikings, for example. If they saw like a woman that's like tall, voluptuous, and all that, it may not have been more of a okay, like she's hot. It's more like okay, no, she has these traits that are gonna breed, like healthy, strong, quote unquote warriors, or people that are that we want in our culture.
Yeah.
Because nowadays it's different. We're like more vain. Where we're like, okay, I'm attracted to this girl because she has X, Y, and Z. I'm just physically attracted to it. I'm not walking down the street being like, look at that girl, those birthing hips, bro. Like, yeah, that's what I want to get in. But I think back then, like you're saying that like they were just probably just going and just pretty much almost like just looking at things that looked desirable to prolong and strengthen their race as a whole.
Yeah, no, exactly. A good fictional example of that is like, you remember Tormund from Game of Thrones with the big red beard? How he wanted to have monster babies with Brienne of Tarth because she was. Yeah, it's just like that, man.
Yeah, dude was obsessed with that WNBA looking chick.
What? So you had mentioned that nowadays we don't really go like looking down the street and looking for the best reproductive person. So do you still think like what percent of people do you think actually just solely date based off of that? Like I probably won't date you just because you don't really have really big hips. Like do you think that's a good amount of people, like maybe 10%?
It could be a cultural thing too now, because we've all like different cultures have developed different things they're attracted to, I guess. I don't know whether it's based off how they're raised or based off things with the culture. Like for example, this is gonna sound entirely crude, but it is. But like I remember I was watching this BuzzFeed video a long time ago, and they showed different cultures pornography, right? Mm-hmm. So they had like I think they had these two guys, one guy from Japan and one woman from Japan, and they exposed them to different cultures pornography. They showed them like two white people having sex, two black people having sex, and then all these different cultures, and the way that they described each couple having sex was very interesting. That's the part that's very fascinating, because in their culture, for example, it's like the people tend to be like a little bit more petite. So when they saw two black people having sex, the guy literally describes like they look strong, like they're strong, when they're going at it. So to them, they're actually scared about it because the guy described it as he looked like he couldn't handle that. So for example, like if that guy were to get some ass thrown on by like Meg Thee Stallion, he was more like, oh, I don't want all that. That's too much, right?
I don't want no smoke.
Yeah, I don't want no smoke, bro. I'm not ready for that. and then he looked at, and then they showed this. He watched like two white people having sex, and then they used the word specifically dramatic. And I was like, why it's dramatic? But they also said they were more inclined to that. And it's one of those things where if you look at just the way that the values and what they like, it was more in tune with the two white people having sex. So I guess the desirable trait, or like, for example, like a lover that's more, I guess, I don't know. I want to say the word to use is dramatic, but it was more based off their values versus like, let's say, for example, like Spanish culture. Like if you look at, their culture as a whole, it's very passionate. It's very exciting. There's a lot of energy to it. So what they're going to look for in a mate is going to be different. But I also think it's thoroughly based off, how you're raised and the culture that you tend to subscribe to. So when I'm walking down the street, there are probably things that I'm looking at in a mate that are subconscious to me. Like there are things that I know I like just based off, I guess like preference, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of subconscious, like you don't even realize that like you're attracted to this.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's kind of
I think
like,
so.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I guess it's kind of like like walking down the street and you're like, damn, she got really big ears. And I don't know why I like that, but maybe some use for having big eared kids or, some fetish or something like that. But
just never know, man. You just never know. It's not a coincidence that there are certain cultures that have certain aesthetics that they're like, like it's for whatever reason, like, for example, like, African American culture, there's always that, I guess you could say there's always the image of like black dudes, like big asses. But it's fucking true. I mean, that's the thing. Well, for what reason, why, we don't know, but we do know that, like, if you meet, like, 90% of black dudes want a girl that's, built thick. Or, for example, in Asian culture, if you look at even, like, anime, what's one thing you notice? All these girls, even if they're, like, 15, are always drawn for breasts. Even if you look at, like, Japanese or Chinese models, they're always massive breasts, tiny little waists, and then barely any ass. But that's just something that in the culture, that's just what's seen as attractive. So when you see a person that grows up in that, and then you go look at that, the kind of mate that person's going to look for, more than likely they're going to probably look for things like that because that's what they've always seen, or that's just kind of something maybe that's pre-programmed in them. I'm not too sure, but I mean, it's just I guess, bro science, as I like to call it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I do agree that it is a lot of subconscious thinking, and I think that it's not really in the forefront of our brains as much now, thinking about, oh, will this woman be a good mate for offspring anymore? Because medical science has evolved so much. If a woman can't produce milk, we have formula. If a woman can't bear a child for full term, it's okay. A premature baby is probably still going to make it if it makes it past, I don't know, I think if it makes it to like 30 weeks, it's still fine. I could be wrong about that. I'm kind of guesstimating. But it's really, I think, tying that back to the whole adaptation thing is, with a lot of modern medicine, we've really kind of halted natural selection. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, from what you were saying, it's like we almost, the natural selection was pretty much our way of, I guess, editing out the quote unquote weak, as bad as that sounds. But now that we can keep, I guess, certain people alive that probably wouldn't survive, it's also probably posing new problems and challenges.
Yeah. I think that, so especially with genetic illnesses that are just passed down, and it's not a fault of behavior or anything like that. I think really the example I've been drawn to the most is cystic fibrosis. So that's a genetic disease where your lungs produce a lot of extra mucus, and it inhibits your breathing and causes all sorts of complications. The life expectancy for a cystic fibrosis person 20 years ago was not very good. Now people are living into their 30s. Some are pushing 40, and because of that, those people are getting to the age where they're able to have families now, and that's allowing that gene to be passed on. So I think it's really interesting that, and it's great that modern medicine is allowing these people to live more fulfilled lives. But now the focus, we see it kind of shifting a little bit to more of the gene therapies that I think John brought up in the intro, like CRISPR, to try to start eliminating those genes.
Yeah, so CRISPR is a very, very interesting a thing to talk about. And when when people start talking about CRISPR, I think that's a box that when you open it, I don't think that you can um, close it back up. Kind of like Pandora's box, where when you open it up, everything and anything can happen. Um, so for people that don't know what CRISPR is, it's an acronym, and it stands for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. So I don't know what the hell that means, but essentially just call it CRISPR. Um, and it's a gene like modifying technique, and it composes of two things. It's called guide RNA and Cas9 protein. And so to understand it, it's kind of like when you have a document and you misspell a word. Um, you can use like a search function like Control F to find that error, and you can either delete it, modify it, or whatever it is. That's the simplified version of CRISPR. And so there's a few things that we can do with CRISPR. I think there's like three or four, and one of the outcomes is like no diseases, which is kind of what David was talking about. Not more so just no diseases, but maybe curing them, or well, I guess it is kind of like curing diseases. We're able to cut away a gene that causes like cystic fibrosis, and people won't have to people will be able to live longer and not have to deal with cystic fibrosis and passing that gene down. You can also talk about like genetically modified babies, which I'll actually kind of go into in a few minutes. But that one is a very interesting thing, because there was actually a case in sometime in the early 2010s ish. And there's a baby that was born with 3 DNAs. And so it's very very weird when you hear that, because as most people know, people are born with 2 DNAs, or DNA of 2 people, with your mother and your father. And so this particular baby was born with DNA from their mother, the father, and a like an unrelated female donor. And so this mother carried the genes for this thing called Leigh syndrome. And it's so essentially what it is, it's a neurological disease that's characterized by like progressive loss of movement or mental abilities within the first year of being born. And a lot of people, or a lot of babies that are born with this, die within like 2 or 3 years of being born due to respiratory failure. And so the key part here is that Leigh syndrome, the genes for the disease reside in the mitochondria. And, as that meme says, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So that the mitochondria does play like a big role into this whole CRISPR type of thing. So essentially what happened, it's a technique called pronuclear transfer, and I'll simplify it right after I explain it, because it's very, very confusing just listening to it. And so essentially what they did was they fertilized both the mother and the donor's eggs, and with the father's sperm, and kind of move stuff around so that way the genes from the mother's defective mitochondria are not in the baby. So to follow with me with this, so essentially you have 2 females. On the left you have your mother, and on the right you have like the donor. But so on the left we have the mother's eggs that contain the mitochondrial genes, which are defective, and you don't want those. And those genes cause the Leigh syndrome. While the one on the right has the donor's genes, or the donor's eggs that have the mitochondrial genes that are good, that we want. So that way they won't pass down the Leigh syndrome. So what we do is we fertilize both the eggs, both the mother and the donor's eggs. And, that creates a zygote when you combine the sperm and the egg. So what we're going to do now with this pronuclear transfer is essentially put the eggs of the donor, or we're going to put away the right side with the donor and the father's zygote. And then within the the left side with the mother and the father, it contains the DNA, the genetic material which is inside the nucleus, which is still in the defective egg. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove that genetic material from the mother and essentially transfer it to the egg with the donor and the father. Hopefully that's not too much, but that's essentially what it is. But the mother and the father didn't want to do that because they were, I guess, practicing Muslims. And so they didn't want to do that because that would be killing 2 embryos. Hopefully that was, I know that was kind of a lot.
Yeah, I think I follow. So you take the genetic material from one embryo and you move it into the donor embryo, which has a functioning mitochondria, allowing you to bypass the Leigh syndrome while being able to develop healthy functional cells with the genetic material from both biological parents.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. And so they didn't want to do that just because, like I said before, like they were practicing Muslims and they didn't want to destroy two embryos. So they did this thing called spindle nuclear transfer, and the difference is that we're not going to fertilize the eggs yet. Before I'd mentioned that we want to fertilize both the donor and the mother's eggs. So the difference here is that we're not going to fertilize it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to remove the genetic material from the donor egg and just kind of like throw it away, like throw it in the trash. And then we're going to replace that the nucleus of the mother and put that into the donor one and then fertilize that. And I think that way, when you do that, you don't kill any any
there's right, no fertilized material is wasted. You are wasting genetic material, but that's not technically living because that's only those half cells.
Yeah. So that is the way that they stop the what is the word, kind of like just bring
the manslaughter, the massive killing.
Yeah, essentially, it stopped the manslaughtering of these babies with Leigh syndrome. So it's a way to bypass that.
I mean, to your point, I'm wondering, like, if you can basically edit out, I guess, disease or dysfunctional DNA. And point, could you basically eradicate diseases with this? Like, if we know that, like, let's say, for example, there's a family tree that has a history of, I don't know, like a certain cancer. Could you just basically be able to do this thing where you take, obviously if they're willing, take DNA from another, person and just keep doing that over and over again until there's an entire, I guess, branch of a family tree that does not have this propensity to get whatever disease?
It would be possible, I would think, but I think the limit to that would be it always would have to be a genetic trait. Like it couldn't be something like diabetes, where that is a result, where type 2 diabetes is a result of poor behavior for the course of a lifetime. It would have to be a genetic trait that you can go in and essentially snip it out, either replace it with something else or remove it entirely. And they would also have to be able to isolate it. So they would have to know what they were looking. They have to be able to find it, know what they were looking for, and then be able to replace it. So it's a 2-part question.
Okay, so something like type 2 diabetes. Let's say, for example, I have diabetes. So, like, if you monitor monitor my kids before they're born, there's no way for you to say, even though I've spent a lifetime, treating my body poorly, I don't want my kids to have to deal with my, I guess, my sins on a genetic level. You can't be like, I'm going to cut out, isolate whatever part of, I guess, like the DNA strand is responsible for my poor choices and take that out. But that's just not possible. It's only for specific ailments.
It would only be for specifically genetic ailments. Now, type 1 diabetes, I believe, is a little more on the genetic spectrum. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but that's where your pancreas is essentially failing from birth. So I would think that would be something that you could apply this technology to. But many diseases, many diseases that we treat with modern medicine, like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, are things that I think are more behavior related, where this wouldn't be able to come into play as much, based on my understanding of it now.
Yeah, I think that the type 1 diabetes, I think that you could maybe find the gene that causes, your poor
Pancreatic,
insulin, like
failure.
your poor insulin production, and maybe not ramp it up, but quote,
turn it on.
Build essentially just make it so you're able to make insulin. And I think that one would work. Type 2, I don't think that, or type 2 diabetes, I don't think you could CRISPR that. Is that a CRISPR? Is that a verb? I guess you're going to CRISPR something.
It is now. That's the thing, man, about words. If you say something and I understand what you mean, that's a word.
A word.
Yeah, that's how words are made.
So I, we had mentioned like no diseases and genetically modifying babies, and I think the other two was like eternal youth. Then we can kind of keep that springtime of youth burning. You don't want to. How many people want to live forever, just to see the world, like how it turns out, or
I would want to live for an extended period of time. Like there's this comic book, actually. It's going to be a Netflix adaptation about this group. It's called The Old Guard, and it's basically about a group of human beings that are essentially immortal, but they can die, but they have extended lives. So that makes sense. So and they die and then they come back. And every time they don't know if it's going to be their last time, on this earth. I would almost want more or less the same way. Like I think having the knowledge of knowing that you're going to live forever, like if science ever got there where basically I guess our cells could like infinitely reproduce and you could always you wouldn't be dying, because isn't that like the second we're born, we're just slowly dying? Like it's like, so
it's
you're
really dark to think about it like that.
Yeah, morbidly speaking, yes.
Exactly. The second you're born, guys, it's over. No,
it is downhill from there.
But but like if you look at it from that context, it makes the way you live your life a lot different if you know that, well, at the end of the day, I can do this forever. But I do think that if human beings were given extended life, we could do a lot with it. Like let's say the average human being lived until let's say 300 years. You live 300 years. So that means around like 100, you're getting old. That's like when you're like 40.
33,
Yeah, like I do think that would be beneficial, but I don't know. I do think it's a necessary component of us knowing that we're mortal to be productive as a society and just keep kind of like, I guess you can say, for lack of a better word, that moral alignment and balance. Because if this CRISPR gets to the point where, I can go out and do something horrendous, die, and then come back, I don't know if I'm going to learn from that and be like, well, I messed up that life. Let me just go ahead and try it again. I could always come back.
Yeah, the lack of consequences could definitely be a real moral and ethical kind of dilemma, because people can just be like, fuck it, I'll do whatever I want, and there's nothing bad will happen to me, so fine.
And I read this thing, isn't there a jellyfish that technically biologically is immortal? If nothing happens to it, like it's not attacked by anything, or it doesn't suffer any external injuries from an outside source. I read there's a jellyfish that actually is immortal.
I've never heard of that, but now I kind of want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, there's like, it's something to do with its physiology. Like it actually, and they use the word biologically immortal because its cells are constantly reproducing. So it can live like there are jellyfish that are like 1,000 years old.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So technically, I forget, but the way it can die is like since its body is pretty much just comprised of like basically 90% water. Like honestly, I wish I had done some research prior to like figure out what exactly it's called. But if it stays in this environment unattacked or attacked by anything else, it is immortal. But if also like it goes on the beach, it can evaporate, or if it's attacked by something else, it'll die. But if it just spends the rest of its life not contacting anything, it lives forever.
So essentially, it's just, I thought about this when you just mentioned that. You remember Dr. Connors from Spider-Man and how he wanted to combine, lizards and humans because he wanted to essentially like grow his arm his arm back, right? What if CRISPR can be used to cross um, what is the word? Cross species genetically modify, if that makes sense. Like introducing genetic material from animals that we think are desirable. For instance, like that jellyfish. What if we add that into our genes, like cross species genetic swap? I don't know what the word is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, splicing would be the term, right?
Yeah, splicing. Yeah.
I actually Googled that jellyfish real quick, and just for a little more background to it.
I literally saw that's what I was also saying. The Turpus Dornry sounds like a Game of Thrones name.
Yeah, so it looks like they can go to a fully matured state, and then if they want to, or if they're in like a state of starvation or away from resources, they can revert back to where they were, I guess, in a larva state. So they basically can just revert back to colony and then come back out again. So they can essentially go dormant and then come back to life, I guess, is my Wikipedia understanding of it.
Yeah, I was saying that exactly goes back to being like I guess it lives out its life, and if things aren't going right, I guess it reverts back to its like larva stage, and then I guess just comes back. I guess it's like almost like something of a human being. It's like a human being being like, all right, I'm 80 years old. This isn't working out. I'm going to go back to being like 4.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna head out and then
yeah,
come
this
right
isn't
back.
working out, guys.
I guess like if that thing went back to its larva state, do you think us going into like the fetal position would be the larva state? Just
I guess that's what we try to make it seem like.
Yeah.
But that's wild though. Do you think honestly, like with this CRISPR thing, like going back to what you guys were talking about, splicing, like what if we were able to splice? I know, I guess obviously it deals with compatibility and things like that, but let's say, for example, we're in a science fiction movie and right now somebody's like, let's splice the DNA of this jellyfish for human beings. Would CRISPR be like the beginnings of something like that? Like being able to even remotely attempt something like this? Obviously, I know it's completely fictional as of right now, but would CRISPR be essentially like the beginning stages of a device or, an application that could do that?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, you would have never thought that this would be such a thing now, but it's slowly becoming a thing. I don't know how you could apply, a human being going back into kind of a dormant state and then coming back out. But
that would be so weird.
I mean, eventually people figure it out. So
that's the reason I'm always fascinated with like when it comes to like science and technology, because man, if you go back 500 years ago, the things that people were like, yo, this is 100% impossible are things that we're doing 100% now, like easily now. Driving cars, flying planes, like having even the device that I'm using right now, a little brick that I'm able to see, John and David in HD. Like a couple years ago, that was impossible. So the things we're talking about now, like the splicing, it seems thoroughly impossible right now. I am 100% understand that. But give it 1,000 years, not even 1,000, give it like 200 years. With people like Elon Musk existing, I find it hard to believe that one day we would not be able to, maybe like if we can't solve like certain problems with human physiology, maybe the answer is getting help from other animals or things like that. Like for example, there's this thing called the oxalotl, where I believe it's a salamander that has the ability to 100% regrow its limbs. So it can lose its arm, lose its tail, and 100% regrow it. Versus human beings, where once we fully develop our appendages, that's it. You lose your arm, you're done. But I wonder if you were able to, for whatever reason, if you guys want to, I think it's called like the axolotl. It's a very small little like salamander-looking lizard, but it literally does it almost Deadpool style. Like it'll cut its arm or tail get cut off, and it'll grow back slowly, but it 100% grows back. So can you imagine if we live in an age one day where, you're able to take some little DNA from this little dude, inject it into a human being, and then, like paraplegics or, people that have suffered grievous injuries, all of a sudden now I'm able to regrow my arm back or regrow my leg back or even lose, regrow, like, if I lost my eye, regrow it back, something of the sort.
Yeah, actually, that kind of makes me think a little more back to the jellyfish. Because I would think that, if you could make those cells go from dormant to not dormant, maybe that could be used for someone who suffered a paraplegic type of injury to where those nerve cells in the spinal cord can be essentially reactivated.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that could be an application of that. I don't think that's too far off from
there has to be
from that
like
bro science. Yeah.
Exactly. There has to be a way to do it. If some, I guess maybe this is maybe an oversimplification, but I look at it in terms of if there's something that exists right now that is currently doing it. Like it's not like this is a theoretical concept. Like that jellyfish like it's technically immortal. It can revert back to its earlier, like its earlier stages, and then keep doing it back and forth, back and forth. This little salamander is losing its limbs and tails and regrowing it. So maybe based on our natural physiology, we're not capable of doing that. But with help and technology, hey, it's like the same thing with supplements and vitamins. If you look back in the day, like can you imagine if like warrior races had things like like supplements that we have now you find in GNC? Dudes would have been they would have been savages. If you see fucking Leonidas out here taking protein shakes, they would have taken down Persia by the juiced up on
you see him like juiced up on like creatine and
creatine pre-workout
steroids.
Like, this is for Sparta. Just throws a spear all the way from fucking Greece all the way to like Iran. But like those were things that they didn't have back then. That I'm sure back then they would have thought they were impossible. Like if you asked a dude back then, if you drink this potion, quote unquote, and it's going to accelerate your muscle growth, that would have sounded crazy back then. Right now, I'm saying, hey, can we splice our DNA with other things and essentially become, I guess, more of a human? Right now, it sounds crazy, but let's say in 100 and 200 years, and CRISPR has been going around, I don't think it's too far-fetched to believe that something like this could be possible.
Oh, yeah. I think it's only really limited by people's imaginations.
Yeah, we just need an Elon Musk in every country because he seems to be the only guy that is willing to take crazy concepts and actually try to do it.
So, you had mentioned that this whole thing is kind of limited by our imagination. So what about using CRISPR to like bring back old species? Like what if we're able to bring back like pterodactyls or...
I'm not with that.
You're not with that?
Mm-mm. Not with like dinosaurs. I mean, if they want to bring back like something like something like the dodo bird, that's not going to hurt me. That's fine, but I don't need any dinosaurs, man. I've seen that movie.
Yeah. You don't want to have like Pokemon flying all around, stuff like that. Yeah, random ass.
Nah. Pokemon running around, that's awesome. But at the end of the day, like Pokemon is basically a world where human beings have enslaved the species and forced them to fight. So that's another dark rabbit hole.
I don't know. I feel like if you could bring back other species, that'd be kind of cool. I don't really have one off the top of my head, but just seeing stuff that millions of years ago we wouldn't even think about, just having like a woolly mammoth or whatever it is, having that just back in here.
My big concern is I don't think that I think we've evolved. Like I guess I wouldn't add I think there's some sort of like plan with the way evolution has worked. I don't even know what it's equated to, but I think we're not equipped to handle certain things. Like, for example, if dinosaurs were a prevalent species on this earth, I think we'd be getting murdered all the day. I'd be going to Costco and then I'd have to like sprint to the door because a T-Rex is hanging out in the bush. Like, dude, like, I'm not ready, Like back then, because I think the one thing they always say is that like I guess early Neanderthals and like Homo erectus, whatever, the movies get it wrong where they didn't exist during the same times as dinosaurs, like us, like early human beings, and dinosaurs didn't exist at the same time. The movies make it seem like that, but they didn't. And to me, it makes sense because what can we possibly do to those things? Like, how could we like maintain like unless it would have to be like we'd have to use like the military to maintain population control some of these things. Otherwise, we'd be getting destroyed and murdered every 2 seconds. Like, can outrun saber-toothed tigers every day, and even if you go for a swim, you get swallowed by like some fucking star-looking lizard. Like, dude, it's just a bad time. We bring those guys back.
I feel like if we do that, yeah, that's definitely a rabbit hole that we don't want to go down because whatever, like again, this goes to the whole thing, whatever our imagination limits what we can do. And so there's obviously people who can go think of anything and everything. That's what they do just all day. They think of stuff that they want to have back or whatever. And someone will use that for worse. And I don't want to go to Costco and have to worry about a fucking T-Rex behind me. I want to get my chicken and go home. Like, I don't want to have to worry about that.
And also another thing to think about is that I've always subscribed to the theory that human beings, in terms of our survival capabilities, I feel like we've regressed in that regard. Back in the day, like every day you woke up, it was about survival. It's about like not getting eaten and putting food in your stomach. It's a good life to the point now where things are so easy that I don't know if you would survive in that kind of environment because we have it too good. When's the last time you had to fight for your life? Anything? And then there was a group of us that back in the day had to do that every single day. So if you were to bring back some sort of predator species, I just think that most human beings, as much as we all think we're super cool and think we'd be running around like Conan with swords and taking down dinosaurs, most of us are going to die immediately, myself included. I like to think I'm cool, but I'd probably try to hit something with an arrow and then get picked up by a pterodactyl that John's trying to bring back, and that'll be the end of my story.
What if that's a way to counteract people living forever? We just eat natural products.
Population control, dude.
Yeah,
not
population
a dinosaur
control. No, it'll be like a form of like population control. Like, oh, we have these people living to like 1,000 years, but
So basically, we talk about this is like they're like, you know what? New York City's overpopulated. Let's release a couple of dinosaurs in there and just have it figure itself out.
Yeah, so I haven't really thought about how to control the dinosaur, but that's the general idea.
Dude, there's running theories that that's what the coronavirus is. Have you heard about those?
Mm-mm.
That they think that honestly, like even though I think now it's confirmed that the virus originated in a lab in Wuhan, but like
I'm all in on that, man.
Yeah, like the debate is what the purpose was, because either way, like the virus clearly is not anything that is meant for anything other than malicious intent. So either it's a weapon, like they were like, okay, we're gonna plan on using this on our enemies. Let's just go ahead and get this down. Oh shit, we dropped the bat, and now it's out. Or it's something that they were like, yo, we know that we have a population control issue. What better way to accidentally, quote unquote, release, some virus and wipe a couple people out? Like going back to what David was saying, is like we've halted natural selection, so we don't have a natural level of people dying out. Like if you look at, generations as times go on, whether it's the Renaissance era or medieval times, they've always had some major plague, which essentially was Earth's population control. Like, hey, we have too many people. Let's go ahead and release this bubonic plague real quick and clean this thing out. It's like clearing your history on your laptop. Yep, no one knows now. Just wipe that thing out. Same thing, so now I'm like, we don't really have that because of like what you guys have been talking about. Like we have all these counteractive measures, like whether it's things like CRISPR or things like that to keep people
modern medicine.
Modern medicine, yeah. So, with the coronavirus, it just seems like it seems too naive not to think that it could have been put out without the intent of cleaning things up. I personally am half and half, 50-50 on it, but it would be a very natural, a very interesting way of jump-starting natural selection, because you have some people that are asymptomatic that are not affected at all, and you have some people that are literally on their death right now.
Yeah, I definitely think that it could have originated in a lab, but I don't think that the malicious intent was there. And I'll tell you why. Because if they wanted to have malicious intent, I think they would have released way more of a heavy-hitting virus than something that the death rate is as low as it could as low as it is being projected to be. Like, I don't really know if all the numbers are correct, but based on what we've seen so far, the death rate is, I think it's less than 1% or 1%, something very low. But if they were trying to really release something, that death rate would be way higher up there, I think.
Well, what I've always wondered is what would be because the thing about the coronavirus is like there is no positive element to it at all. Like for example, I look at it in terms of if you were to just kind of shave off a little bit of the population, because it's just in like your 1% is 1% of what, like total global population. That's a lot, it's a lot of people that this thing is like, essentially taken out, but enough in a way where it's not devastating to the way the world functions. It's not society crippled, it's just like
it was like a test.
Ooh.
kind of like,
I didn't even think about
let's see how this works, and just maybe not hit him
Ooh.
like full force. Just be like, oh,
'Cause,
let me just slap you real quick.
Man,
yeah,
I don't. Yeah.
that's something. Think about how little. Think about how this, like, going back to what David was saying, how this little, like, the numbers aren't that high, but look how the world is shut down.
Yeah, exactly.
It was
Yeah.
shut, and also as well too. Have you noticed? Have you seen those photos of what some of these countries are looking like with less people in the streets? Beautiful. The environment is starting to fix itself,
Mm.
And and all this stuff seems too much of a coincidence, because like it's like the Earth is actually doing better with us sitting in our apartments, and houses, and not out
Mhm.
there just running. Like China alone was doing some damage to their environment, to the point. I saw a video a couple years ago of a guy took a sample of, like, I think it was like oxygen in the city, and he made a solid out of something that was in a gas. How
Mhm.
polluted is your environment to the point where you can make a solid object from something that you're inhaling? So can you imagine what that's doing to your internal body? So now you have, like, these people that are pretty much forced to stay indoors. And if you ever get a chance, look at before and after, like 30 days before and after, like
Oh yeah.
New York City or even Italy. Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
it's just entirely different. Like the other day I was looking up at the stars. I'm like, yo, I can see the stars. And I'm like, does that have anything to do with the fact that, people aren't out here running around with their Ford F-150s polluting the environment anymore? I'm like, I don't know.
That might actually be another topic that we'll do next week. The kind of like the implications of coronavirus, not more so of like how many people have died, but more so of like how has the world changed because of this. Maybe
Ooh,
that might
yeah.
be something.
That'd be a cool thing to speculate on. That'd be a fun rabbit hole to go down, I think.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I guess to wrap this all up, let's use like our imagination. Let's kind of see, if you could use CRISPR, what would you guys use it on? Because
Mm,
I know it's kind of just on the spot, but
CRISPR. I think I'm going to go with extending my life a little bit, because I've always been kind of pissed off with the fact that I think that I think what we're born during a very interesting time. We're born at the beginning of a lot of
Mhm.
technological revolutions, and I don't think I'll be able to see it play out. Like, because honestly, I'm the guy that I want to see movies like Ready Player One become an reality, you know. And I think we're at the beginning of a lot of stuff, and I feel like I'm gonna die right before the first, like, Neuralink Elon Musk is put into somebody's head. So I
Mhm.
would want to just extend my life, maybe like give me another 100 years, nothing too fancy, another 100 years, just to see where society is going, and then I'm good to go.
Okay, so you want to extend your life.
Yeah,
What
life.
about what about you, Dave?
I'd actually been thinking about this a little bit. There's a few things, but I guess since I've been gym deprived the past couple months, I think I would like to have denser muscle fibers, just to overall strength increase.
Mm.
Would be kind of cool.
Would you want to look like Muscle from My Hero?
Not quite. I don't think. I think just having denser muscle fibers, I would look relatively the same. It would just be more solid, capable of lifting, like moving more, that kind of thing.
So, you guys have mentioned very, very interesting ones, and I think we talked about this last time, but I still think I'm going to go with changing my knees, having them better, because
You're like the guy that finds a magical genie and is like, "You got one wish. You can ask for anything." I wish I had a sandwich right now. The most uninventive wish of all time. I could go for a sandwich, I guess.
dude, I don't know, man. Yeah, sadly, I think I have to agree with you. I think I would be that guy that would be like, "Oh, hey, you have one wish. Let me get a sandwich from Subway." That
Let
would
me
be
get a
cool.
number 5 with
Yeah.
cheese.
Yeah.
You want anything on it? No, just this plain sandwich.
Some beef.
Yeah, you don't want any teriyaki chicken? No, I'm good. You got one wish, dude. No, I'm good, man. Just provolone.
Well, hopefully that doesn't. Hopefully people come up with other interesting things. So if you guys have any, I guess it's a question to the listeners. What would you guys use for this CRISPR for this one time thing? Other than that, Dave, thank you for coming on. It was a really great pleasure to talk to you, and I think we've all learned a lot of stuff today.
Yeah, hey, thank you for having me. It was really fun exploring this kind of topic. It was really fun.
Definitely. So if you guys, if the listeners like this podcast, why I say podcast, please hit that like button, follow button. I think I made a post yesterday about how we're now on Apple Podcasts. So if Spotify isn't your thing, we have options. I think we have like 6 or 7 options. Follow us on our social media. Our Instagram is Puzzled Minds Podcast. Our Instagram is Puzzled Minds Pod, and our email is puzzledmindspodcast@gmail.com, where we do encourage anyone to submit a topic that you think that we should talk about. Other than that, everyone, stay puzzled.